Hello everybody, this is Peter, and welcome to the February 17th, 2010 weekly radio address. At least I try to make it weekly, as I'm sure people have noticed. I have had some scheduling problems, so I've done my best to be as consistent as I can. Unfortunately, with the development of Zeitgeist Day and, of course, the new film, my time has been all over the place. I've been having to do too much traveling. It's been exhausting. But I apologize for the break in between all of this. I do believe that the shows have a lot of value, and I'm going to try and continue to be as consistent as possible. Even when I am traveling, it's just the integrity of things get kind of haywire when I'm somewhere else and try to interface with what needs to be done at Blog Talk Radio to make it happen. But anyway, I hope everyone out there is doing good. I had a few quick announcements, and then I'm going to go through long-awaited questions that have been sitting on the forum for 2 weeks, and then we're going to have Jacque and Roxanne on for the second half. And they'll be talking about, I think, their world tour a little bit, and I'll also address some of the forum questions to them as well, and anything else they want to address. It's been tiring the past few months. I apologize if I'm a little lackluster, but I'm continually happy with the way things have been going. With the settling aspect. As I said before, the movement is still very much in its infancy. Those of you that are coming to this, those of you that are new, in other words, you might say, well, what's going on? How do I involve myself more actively? It's important to point out that the teams are in existence. We have teams that are developing, which are going to get more serious as we move forward, as more people come to the surface that can serve organizational roles. My biggest focus as of now has been the chapters, and we've had some great progress. We just added Finland and Japan and a bunch of great countries to our international list. And after the chapters stabilize, we're going to move into more focus with the teams. And you guys have heard me talk about this, so I won't go into the different angles of the teams and what their purpose is. But please bear in mind that at this stage in our communicative process, we're still collecting people and trying to get things organized. This movement isn't really functional in the sense that I would like it to be yet. So I understand there's frustration, but just relax and roll with it. The collapse of the global economy is not stopping anytime soon, and we're going to be catching our breath many times over the course of this transition. Okay, let's see. Call for promos. All of you guys out there that have Z-Day events, I want to see promos up on YouTube. I'm going to make my own for New York, and we're going to have a page designated on zday2010.org for all promos. I think this would just be great media exercise, so make any type of promo you can in a video form just to get it up there. I think flooding YouTube, flooding all the video sites with these, interlinking them, embedding them everywhere, really show the global presence through a simple media promo. It doesn't have to be super artistic. Just do anything you can to get that out there. Perhaps even you could advertise these things on local networks in your area if you have the ability to output the tape and do the process of that. But I want to further reiterate that it is about promotion here. We have to get people to listen to us, and in order for them to do that, they have to recognize that we even exist. And for most people on the planet, they have no idea any organization of such is in operation. So if you have a promo or you make a promo, email it with the subject promos, or how about Z-Day promos, to media@thezeitgeistmovement.com. Second point, the London lecture that was done in July is now up in the toolkits for NTSC. I'll get the PAL up hopefully today. That was requested a few times, so I'm trying to get that up there for ISO download through torrents. So that's happening if you have any interest in that one. I'm also trying to get all the other, the physical presentations together, but it's been very difficult with the conversion, and I've just been swamped, and I need to do that. But I want to say for all of you out there that want to give your own unique presentations, that it's worth going through the exercise of building these things yourself, even though I will get these things online, my prior presentations online. It's worth going through the route of making and creating these things yourself. It's a good learning process. It's much more rewarding than repeating anything that might be said by myself or anyone else. So I would just encourage that. Before I jump into the questions, I wanted to read something from a book that I've been reading. In fact, I've been tracking a lot of his material recently. His name is John McMurtry. I believe he's from Canada. He's a professor in Canada. And he wrote a book called The Cancer Stage of Capitalism. And it's been a tremendously informative book. It was actually written in 1999, really prophetic, what he's been talking about. And I strongly suggest reading his materials. I haven't found anything that I really didn't agree with in his very intellectual works. I want to read a section that he has in the opening of this book that I think might have some value. And it's in regard to what he refers to as life ground itself. He uses terminology that's a little bit different. He talks about how a socioeconomic system needs to be contingent upon things that actually produce, which of course is directly in line with what we talk about in a resource-based economy. It's about basing our social structure on resources rather than middle mediums, third-party mediums of exchange, which have been the patterns thus far, which have been leading to destruction, as we've all seen. So let me just read this. Hopefully I can, state this clearly, because I think it really summarizes things quite well. Just so you know, the context of what I'm about to state, is in regard to a different social system that's actually based on something relevant. Life ground is one term he uses, but I think it'll become clear as I read. Quote, "This investigation's framework of social self-understanding adopts a wider lens than the currently received models of social explanation. In particular, the engineering model of neoclassical economics, from which life value has been expelled. It is a telling symptom of our condition that no established school, discipline, or general theory of social analysis has grounded itself in life requirements as such. Instead, some social construct is invariably adopted as the ultimate reference body, a set of ideas, the state, the market, a class, technological development, or some other factor than the life ground itself. Or social ideologies have found their independent variable of determination in an already given structure of the world, God's plan, human nature, a racial type, archetypal memories or psychostructures, genetic reproduction, geographical conditions, and so on. Once this closed reference set decouples from the vital, highly specific and interconnected requirements of the life ground itself and becomes an autonomous system of selection and exclusion overriding all claims of life to expand itself, it becomes a lethal value program. The degrees of its deadliness in turn, is borne by its technical powers of manufacture, communication, and destruction, and their pervasion. The self-regulating global market system presents us with a totalized paradigm of such a program at the end of the 20th century. Its technical powers and morbidities of effect have propelled the wholly unprecedented crisis of global life deterioration and collapse that emerges today." That is a rather wordy but a brilliant way to describe what has happened and what we are faced with today. So, Cancer Stage of Capitalism, tremendous work. All right, so I'm going to jump right into your questions. Question 1. Hi, Peter. I have 2 questions involving economics. First, in watching the Orientation Guide movie, you state that contractions or raised interest rates by the Federal Reserve leads to recessions or depressions. Could you first elaborate on how this works? Because just thinking about it makes it seem like if interest rates were raised, it would only lead to less borrowing, not less total money in circulation, but I could be wrong. Okay, I'll stop you there. There's more attributes that come into play when you're dealing with contractions of the economy. It's not just interest rate related. The Fed, when it does raise rates, is essentially saying, okay, we have to make our debts more expensive to slow the economy, to stop inflation, essentially. And that's pretty much why they do it. Interest rates have a general correlation to recessions and growth. Usually when they're low, it triggers growth periods, and when they're high, it triggers periods of contraction. It's not that the money doesn't vanish, but the money slows. As we all should know now, our entire economic system is based on money being constantly introduced. There's no other way for supposed, quote, growth to occur. We live in a growth paradigm that's infinite, that is destructive. So that is always a given, in other words. So when the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, what it's saying is that, okay, we got to slow things before inflation happens, and that's all they do. That doesn't mean new money isn't being still created. It obviously is. I'll just look at the money supply, and you can see what's actually happening there. I hope that answers your question very simply. There's a huge topic, but I want to stop there and answer the second half of your question. Quote, also in my business class, we are studying the recent recession, and we learned that when this all started back in 2006 with the credit default swaps, that the federal interest rate was at an all-time low of 1%. I was just curious to hear your take on this. Well, that goes back to the original point. The unique thing about what's happened is that the Fed's rate has gone essentially to zero, and it hasn't helped anything because of the derivatives explosion, because of the outstanding debt that's in circulation. So it's way beyond just interest rates. Those are averages. In other words, it is typical for low interest rates to equate to growth. Usually, it's also a way to buffer recessions and declines of the boom and bust cycle. In other words, when they start to see a contraction occur, and they don't want it, they will lower interest rates as much as they need to in order to even it out. And that just simply creates more money and continues what is essentially this pyramid scheme, which has blown up on multiple levels. And that's about all I really think I need to say about that. We've talked about this quite a bit. I think in the orientation guide, the physical guide, if you read it, I talk about why the Fed does these actions and how it relates to debt and inflation and the inherent problems of the monetary system. So, number 2. My question is in regards to the psychological suffering caused by living in a system that I know to be completely messed up, corrupt, false, and have 98% of the people I encounter be completely oblivious to that, right? Do you or did you also have the problem of psychological stress, and do you have advice on dealing with it? It becomes bewildering after a while that you walk around, in my life, I walk around and all I see now is tremendous amounts of inefficiency. I walk into a store, I see the mundane pointlessness of half the things that they're selling. I see a culture manipulated by value systems that serve only the mechanism of cyclical consumption. It gets very frustrating. And I guess the best thing you can do is, first of all, accept that that's where we are at our state, in our state of evolution, and try to have a good sense of humor about it. There are many serious things that need to be addressed in a very serious manner, but you have to step back and accept it for what it is, and then try not to let it absorb who you are, and try not to get too emotionally connected with the problems themselves. There's a danger to become jaded and even fanatical if you start to recognize this and start to think it's the end of the world in a non-productive sense. So all I could really say to you, as far as what's helped me, is that I kind of look at it as though I'm watching a TV show. I try to detach myself as best I can from it in an emotional sense, and it's tough. It's tough. It's tough to walk around and see what's happening and to see how much easier things could be, and also to, of course, assume the trends and just project the trends that we see and to see how much destruction is awaiting. So I understand your question. I would just say that you have to learn how to decouple emotionally from that issue and learn to have balance in what you do, and find other activities that you do find enjoyable. Don't always focus on the negative. I think you get the point. Number 3. Hey, Peter, I'd like to address all the knockoff websites and organizations out there. Can we make a list of these and post it in the chapter section of the Zeitgeist Movement website? I feel it would be beneficial to know exactly what sites are not to base information from. It's quite confusing seeing all the different websites throwing out words like zeitgeist and resource-based economy. The offshoot websites, I've stated a few times, the Zeitgeist Movement is established. It was created so people would actually join our initiative, not for people to be influenced by it in the sense that they can run over and do something else, create another website, create another project, build upon it in a way that, I'm sorry, as far as I'm concerned, or as far as Jacque and Roxanne are concerned, are not productive outlets at this point in time. There are a lot of organizations out there that really mean well, and I've tried not to come down on them in any public setting. I'd simply, if the intent is to usurp, or people make, for example, they'll make a website, and it's counter to what we're doing in the sense that it's not counter per se, it's parallel. And the question is, why the parallel creation? Why not start a project team in our current structure and then build from there as more people come? The more we divide ourselves, the more problems arise. I have a general knee-jerk problem with any of the offshoot organizations that have been developed, whether they want to create a new city, whether they have some programming they want to use for transparent donations, which I really couldn't care less about, whether they have established some medium of transition, which I think is really a fantasy. I've yet to see any transition plans that I can honestly say have any real value. There are people that want to make corporations. There are people that want to run for public office. All of these things could have an interlinking quality, but they're distracting from the entire point as of this point as far as the Zeitgeist Movement is concerned, and that is the relevance of communication. It doesn't matter how many... Anyway, I'm not going to go on those tangents. I'm not going to create a blacklist of these sites until I see a real serious problem. I think people should continue to do their work. All I would ask to all these organizations is, why break off and attempt to do something outside of the movement itself? Why cause that conflict? Just because someone builds an organization and gives it a name that's in reference and creates materials doesn't mean I have to recognize. It doesn't mean that Jacque and Roxanne should throw everything down and say, hey, look, there's another organization. Jacque has been doing this for 70 years. Jacque has the experience that we all need to learn from in his worldview, and it's that simple. And anyway, there's a lot of different things I could say on that. I see it as unfortunate that these offshoots are emerging. And, that's an ego issue, too. I think that a lot of them think, well, we can do this better. And they really don't respect the movement for what it is. And if they want to do something else, if they want to go out and build a community, fine, do it. But the moment you put resource-based economy on it, which, by the way, is a global definition, you cannot have a resource-based economy city. It's impossible unless you have 10 people living there and you get everything from farming in that area and you import absolutely nothing. The resource-based economy, by definition, is a global system. So it's that simple. Anyone using that term that doesn't recognize it's a global system isn't understanding, as far as I'm concerned, as far as the definition has been denoted, what it actually entails. There's no way to have a resource-based economy without having access to every form of resource on the planet. So anyway, I'm not going to belabor all of that. I consider the whole thing an unfortunate side effect, but in the end, I'm not that worried about it. I don't put them down unless they put us down, or they try to be insolent, or if they try to use our names to make money. Well, that's going to be a problem. But as of right now, I'm just looking the other way and continuing to do what I think is most productive. As we establish these teams, as we get our chapters out there, there will be shifts in what we do. Please mark those words. This is not the movement that you see right now. We are in a particular phase, in a very, very preliminary phase of getting a structure together, getting an infrastructure of communication together, getting teams that are solid, that understand the material, eventually getting other representatives. I don't like the fact that I'm one of the sole people that goes out and talks about these things. I do want other people out there. I want nothing more than to see a whole team of people out there giving talks in multiple languages in their respective communities. And anyway, I won't even belabor it. Yeah. Number 4, about the weekly address, I think that every single country should have one. Do you agree? I would like to do one for my country. The goal would be to translate your weekly address in order to give information on what is happening worldwide, and then follow what is happening in the different region of France, and of course the Q&A parts. I would encourage those that feel confident with this information to go out and start your own radio shows by all means for your local areas. I would suggest that you continue to stay updated with what I talk about with new developments. Obviously, this is a singular source, if you will. If something happens with the Venus Project, I'm probably the first to know about it usually, or if there's some project or event. So I would say coming from listening to what I'm saying or reading the transcripts is a good starting point. But I would love to see, again, every chapter have its own radio show. And I really want to see it. This entire thing is contingent upon not a hierarchical structure, but a synchronization, a way of seeing and sharing the same goal without the need, after a certain point, of constant instruction. Eventually, it will become self-evident. The motivation, the information will become so self-evident that people will know what to look for on their own. People say that, the Venus Project, it's only one singular structure, it's limited. No, it's not. The Venus Project and its notion of resource-based economy is really just a methodology of thought. It's a way, apart from, of course, their blueprints and what Jacque has diligently created all these years. As far as the concept, this can, once the fundamental methodology and understanding of earthly relationship and resource management and the need for a systems approach is understood, utilizing all the factors we talk about, human factors, value factors, technological factors, the path becomes its own. In other words, it generates its own path. And once that foundational understanding is clear, everyone, I think, will begin to work in a synchronized manner in a positive sense, because we're all pursuing the same thing, and it becomes relatively obvious what the focal points of that pursuit are. I hope that makes sense. I want to continue moving fast with these questions because I know I only have about 25 more minutes before Jacque and Roxanne come on. But we want to get everyone to understand the foundation, and then when they encounter new information, they can understand very logically what's relevant and what isn't. One of the greatest polluters, going back to these offshoots, the greatest polluters of what we're doing are those that have a die-hard inclination that we need money at this point in time. I don't need anyone's money. I want everyone to dedicate their time, not their money. Will money come into play in the future as far as the construction of certain projects or even a city system? Obviously so. No one's denying any of this. But we're not there yet. We're not there yet. I want to see people take their time to investigate and to put forward this information. That's the first step. So I'm gonna leave it at that. Number 5. What can we do to make communication of ideas of the Zeitgeist Movement and the Venus Project to be considered as priority, especially for younger audiences as children and adolescents? Can we use movies or teaching in schools? When will we start with some plan about this? So, obviously this is what we're doing right now. If, in time, as we transition, I would hope that the curriculums of schools will change to give a larger relevance to planetary management and relationship to natural law. But, as far as our general communications of the ideas now, it's everything I just talked about. It's everything that we're doing at this point in time. Number 6. Dear Peter, what is your process for screening questions each week? Do you or do you not take time to distinguish relevancy of posts before addressing them? Yes, I do. But I only do it very, very quickly. I just don't have time. I mean, there are a lot of questions to go through. I really don't. I give a quick run over and I give a sense of what I might say, and then that's it. There are some questions I answer, though, that I think are really asked in earnest, meaning that they really don't understand. In other words, it might seem like an irrelevant question or something I've answered a long time ago, but I do try to mix it up and not just answer, quote, advanced questions. I try to give people the benefit of the doubt if they're asking me something, kind of trivial sometimes, and if I can answer it quickly. For example, like the next question on the forum, which I wasn't going to answer, was, hello, Peter, I found a YouTube clip showing 2 people from the Club of Rome with the same surname as Roxanne. Is this just a coincidence? Obviously, Roxanne has no relationship to the Club of Rome, and even if she did, it wouldn't mean anything. So I would typically skip that question. So that's part of my train of thought. Number 7. Hey, Peter, I recently watched the documentary Collapse. Do you agree with Michael Rupert's hypotheses that the population is about to crash? And do you agree with his opinions on buying gold, storing seeds, growing food, insulating your home, etc., and etc., and have you taken such actions? I'm friends with Michael Rupert. I have a lot of agreement with a lot of things he says, and in certain things I think need more analysis, that I think we jumped the gun a little bit on the way we think things will unfold. I would have to say that I do agree generally with his notion of what type of crash is inevitable if we do not alter our system. Result in population crash, if you will, is not going to happen tomorrow, but it's already kind of occurring already in Africa and countries that have been long forgotten, but that's also been around for a long time. What he's describing with this energy collapse, and since our entire structure is based on hydrocarbons, it is a hydrocarbon economy. While we can speculate on when we might run out of these hydrocarbon fuels and resources, one thing we do know is that we will eventually. And so whether it takes 10 years or 100 years really doesn't become relevant at that stage if we're going to deal with the subject of sustainability. And yes, I think the chain reaction could result in horrors that would seem unfathomable at this point in evolution, considering how most people look at society. As far as the options of buying gold, storing seeds, and the like, I don't put that much gravity into that. It depends on where you are and what you're doing. Being in New York, I don't intend to just shoot out of New York anytime soon. I think you should get out of debt. I think people should become more independent, that's for sure. Buying gold, yeah, if you wanted to. I don't do that. You really can't hide from this type of economic problem. I'm not assuming that we're going to wake up one day and be absolutely out of everything, meaning we're going to have to be using seeds as currency. I think we can begin to transition into something new before we hit absolute rock bottom. I do think there will be a great deal of suffering, however, but I don't see us falling back into an agrarian society because of the collapse of the modern world. I think there's plenty of ways to begin a transition into an advanced system to quickly move into other forms of energy, but the problem is the economic structure won't allow it. This is another reason why we advocate over and over and over again the necessity to remove the monetary paradigm, because it is the source of paralysis for transition. We know we have nano-based technological solar panels that can take in 94% of the amount of energy hitting the panels. The problem is the panels are too expensive. There's no one investing enough money into this type of technology, and the infrastructure is not there. Instead of waiting for the market system to say, okay, we have this new technology, we got to spend X billion to get the first prototype run set up for whatever form of distribution, instead of dealing with the process that the market system requires to put out new technology, we bypass it entirely. We say, forget it. We know where the resources are. We know the technology that we need. We're going to put this into mass production right now because we know we can do it. And all resources are made available for it. That is what is going to transition society. Society, again, will not come from monetary transition. There will be far too much money made with the destruction of society by the elite that work in the Wall Street paradigm that they won't care. Corporations will make a fortune as society is destroying itself. That is the unfortunate reality. That is one of the major problems of our economic structure. So, yeah, we can do it. We can make a transition now into a very efficient system, but it's not going to happen through economics. It will be almost impossible for this to happen through economics for many reasons that we've talked about. I won't even go into the multiple angles of that. Just remember that abundance, sustainability, and efficiency are the enemies of the profit system, and that the entire world is based on cyclical consumption. Perpetual waste is what drives GDP. Number 8. A few weeks ago, I replied to a thread about assisting the disaster in Haiti, where organizations were sending massive quantities of aid resources in an effort to support Haiti during its reconstruction. Among the resources being sent to Haiti were, of course, water. Having recently viewed a video on, quote, lifesaver bottle, and how a single unit no bigger than the average sports bottle could purify over 1,000 gallons of the most polluted water, sending large quantities to water or Haiti or any other disaster seemed expensive and absurd. Would you agree that sending this type of technology to disaster areas instead of sending water would serve as a fine example of a technological solution where humanitarian support seems to do little more than waste resources? Very, very good point. I would say I'm in absolute agreement with you. It's not that I support the technology you're talking about, but it's the idea that you point out, which is so critical. Instead of the patchwork of sending canned goods of soup to Africa, we would create a system that produces high-quality materials for those that are starving on this planet. Jacques talked about this quite a few times. Instead of giving people bottled water, you give them desalination plants. You have to remember that money is made during all crises. There are water companies that are making a profit off of selling water to Haiti. There are reconstruction companies rubbing their hands together, waiting for the time where they can start to make even more money from the destruction that's been generated. So I hope that's clear, but I completely agree with you. Number 9. Dear Peter, I'm going to give a presentation at my college on the Zeitgeist Movement and the Venus Project. I was wondering if you can give me some pointers to describe the movement and its outcome in a concise manner without convolution. This is what we do all day long, what I do all day long. If you go back and look at the video materials, the lectures, the PDFs, Jacques' books, I think you'll find everything that you need. Unfortunately, I don't have time to sit down and give you a step-by-step element. What I would say is if you go back to the prior radio address, if I remember correctly, I do talk about 6 or 7 major points that are often misunderstood about why we do what we do, why the resource-based economy is what it is. If you go back and set the intro, you might find some help there because I made very explicit points in that broadcast. Number 10, when working on social therapy and challenging people's identities, is it not accurate that communicating diplomatically will be less likely to offend or alienate others, which would make it more efficient and effective, make it a more efficient and effective strategy? Well, absolutely. But the term diplomatic, I think, is not to be confused with patronizing. So, if you're going to be honest about what you think and believe, then you need to shed and express that honesty at all points. While there is a strategy to communication, I've talked about this a few times, you don't want to disrespect whom you're speaking with by being patronizing. So diplomatic takes on a lot of different colors. It depends on how you go about it. Disagreeing with somebody for someone's interpretation might be undiplomatic. People like to bullshit each other when they want something from them, and I think that's not to be utilized. What I will say, though, human communication, real effective human communication, is often given an emotional color. So if I use an explicative, if I curse when I make a point, there's a reason for it. It's to show a punctuation. It's to show that exclamation point. It's to show that what I'm saying is, in fact, very important in my mind, which is why I denote that. If we were to just banality describe intellectual concepts to each other without making a kinetic relationship, then I don't think we'd see change as quickly as needed. I've talked about this quite a bit. That's why the films are as gestural as they are. There's always the emotional aspect in communication. And the best forms of communication find balance between intellect and emotionality, meaning that they accent important attributes of the intellectual points with emotional gestures. And I think there's something to be said for that. So, going back to your point on being diplomatic, again, it's a little bit subjective, but generally speaking, absolutely, we want to be diplomatic. You don't want to just run up to somebody and say, hey, you're wrong. That's not diplomatic. I would agree with that. You can say, well, I disagree with you on this, this, and this, and I have reason. And you get the point. So I hope that clarifies. Number 11, if part of the world transitions to a resource-based economy, how does that economy interface with the rest of the world? Good question. It doesn't, because a resource-based economy is a global system. The biggest problem with building a resource-based economy that is detached is that you will have problems, especially if there's a social breakdown. Let's assume we built one of Jacque's circular cities in Latin America, and it was robust, and we'll say it's a real city, and we have, 5,000 people that live in a circular city that is supporting itself with built-in agriculture. Unfortunately, not all resources are going to be available for production distribution, first of all. So there would have to be some way to take a non-monetary economy and interlink it with the monetary economy that exists on the outside. Obviously, this isn't going to work. Obviously, the people on the outside are going to still be operating in the profit paradigm, so they would demand something in exchange. You'd have to have a beneficiary or something, as most do in any commune. Are there barter schemes or something? Again, to reiterate, a resource-based economy is a global construct, and that's what makes this so difficult. Doesn't mean that we can't begin to implement certain gestures across the world, such as a city system that we talk about that serves as a theme park, an educational facility, to show what we can do. Those things, I think, will materialize, but just building a city and calling it a resource-based economy, it's not going to work. It's just simply not going to work unless you literally had control over an entire hemisphere, and you happen to have in that hemisphere everything that you need where you could break away from the rest of the planet, which is essentially impossible. If you look at the distribution of resources on this planet, they're all over the place. So you need a holistic system. So I hope that relates to your question. And actually, I'll add one more thing. And in the event if such a system was created, and let's assume that the financial system continues its breakdown, which it will, then that, quote, RBE economy city is going to be suffering attacks from those that can't afford to eat. So there will be a lot of problems that would emerge from people that are not surviving, and then they walk in and they see this lush new city of efficiency. All they're going to do is want to join, and they will distort the dynamic and balance of the carrying capacity of that particular city, and therefore it can't work again. You can't just build walls around something like this, even if you had all the resources. That's not the way to go. So I hope that clarifies. Number 12. I think you should remind people that it took almost 1,000 years for Europe to emerge from the Dark Ages. Changing thought takes time. However, due to technology's exponential growth, we should see the first city realistically in about 20 years, they say. Side note, what happens when the economy turns positive? I fear many will lose their enthusiasm for the movement. Well, I think today, in fact, the Federal Reserve came out with a report saying that we're not going to see any dramatic changes in unemployment levels for the next 2 years. And to me, when I read that, it means that unemployment's going to get worse for the next 2 years. One thing to understand about the state we're in now versus all the other types of recessions that we've had is that every country is in outrageous amounts of debt. The U.S. government is virtually bankrupt. We've had collapse of cultures across. The collapse of Greece, the collapse of Iceland, the collapse of tons of different places. We are going to be seeing more and more of this. We're far from out of the woods. There's far too much debt in the system, both private and personal debt. Therefore, there's a gravity, a weight that has been a byproduct of the past, 100 years of the pyramid scheme known as the fractional reserve banking system. So you've got to really put into perspective what society is up against. The only way I see society fully recovering is to see global bankruptcy. I like that idea, global bankruptcy, where every single country throws out all of their debt and they go bankrupt against every other country. And essentially the plate becomes clear. But the banking cartels in power, if everyone was out of debt, they would lose their power. The labor market is also driven by people being put into a position of indentured servitude. We're overflowing essentially, and it's going to be. I can't see how this is going to materialize anytime soon. Economic recovery is contingent on a lot of intertwining elements, and all those elements are being pushed to the absolute extreme at this stage. I expect to see much more unemployment. I expect to see more mechanization. I expect to see more cartels emerge as all of the corporations in a particular industry are bought up by one due to the failures of those corporations. I expect to see many more countries start to drop like dominoes because of economic collapse. I expect to see more tent cities, more people living in cars. You got to remember one thing else, that if the economy does recover, all it does is increase consumption, which is also going to lead to eventually the ecological energy crisis, which is looming because of our dependency on hydrocarbons. Once again, it doesn't matter if it happens in 5 years or it happens in 100 years. It's going to happen unless the paradigm is changed dramatically. So once you get to a point where it's globally known that the world is in a decline of oil and natural gas, and it starts to be reflected in the prices due to the supply and demand equation of value, then you're going to see oil hit $200 to $300, $400, $500, $600 a barrel, and no one is going to be able to afford to do absolutely anything. They won't be able to produce their hydrocarbon-based materials. They won't be able to create the plastics. They won't be able to fuel any car. They won't be able to build any more automobiles. They won't be able to power grids. Infrastructure will go to shit. So I think we are on the verge of a form of collapse that's never existed in history because of the economic paradigm and what it's created. And the economy, as we know, will not turn positive in any real sense. We're not going to go back to the levels that we saw in 2007, 2008. It will be recoveries that hit a certain point, a certain plateau, and then drop even more. Then they'll come up again and hit an even lower plateau, and they'll drop even more. They'll come up again, and all the while, everyone will be slowly conditioned into thinking that the state of recovery is actually significant because they will get used to all of these less and less economic booms, if you will. The boom and bust cycle is oscillating up and down, but it's moving at an angle that goes down holistically. If you can imagine a worm going down a mountain, that's the way I interpret what's happening. Again, I'm not a prophet, but I hope that sheds some light on that. Number 13. Hi, Peter. What advice would you give to members of the military who disagree with the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan but feel helpless in trying to educate their fellow soldiers of the fallacy our government is leading them to believe? I know firsthand that there are individuals within our military that express dissent and are quickly silenced and outnumbered by their brainwashed peers. Is there only option to simply finish out their enlistment contract? Well, that's a difficult question. It's a really unfortunate what's happened. Well, it's just really unfortunate that we have this institution at all and it operates as it does. I would go AWOL, or I would get out in a way that would limit my possibility of being court-martialed. I suggest people just get out. If millions of Americans in the military stood up and said, you know what, we're not doing this anymore, then what are they going to do? It's a difficult one because there is a strong legal aspect. There's a bizarre cultural element. I really have no compassion, except for the fact that I know that most of the kids that go into the military really don't know what they're doing. They're doing it. They think, they're going to get free education. They think it's going to get them in line, give them discipline, which in part I'm sure it does. But what the institution they're a part of is a serial killing institution. All soldiers, in their simplest form, and I'm not attacking any soldier, but to be in the military is to be essentially a serial killer, because the entire basis of military is violent confrontation, at least as we know it. There might be some other form of defense that could be created that isn't based on that whatsoever, but nevertheless, that's what the history has shown. So I apologize not to be more helpful there. That's why in the end of addendum I said don't ever let anyone join these institutions. The sad thing is that, actually I'm not even going to talk about that. Number 14. Hello, pardon me if my question is long. Do you have any suggestion on how to reason things out about the movement to our parents? Because last time I browsed the Zeitgeist Movement forums, I found several people who are banned by their parents and joining the movement, and I have the same experience too. My parents even threatened to get rid of my laptop and internet connection if I continue to join the movement, so I have to pretend that I denounce the movement. I think for anyone that sees conflict on a personal level with their friends and family is to just not even bring it up. I know that we want to share our ideas with our friends and family. I have friends that don't agree with this. I have family, distant family that probably doesn't agree with this. Most of my family has been pretty good, though. Just keep it to yourself. and don't. If someone doesn't want to hear about it, then don't bring it up. Your participation in the movement is communication at this stage. It's not that you're wearing a membership badge. I hope that everyone understands that just identifying with this direction is really all you need to do in the attempts to communicate, do your best with those that are more like-minded. So seek those out that you think will get it. And if your parents don't get it, what are you going to do? Just because they're your family doesn't necessarily mean everything hinges upon them. So just be independent in that sense and believe what you think, and don't let people put you down for ideas they might consider to be too radical or anything else. You're always going to come up with the traditional cultural block. This is going to happen. It's the biggest problems that we face are cultural, as we've denoted many, many times. So, okay, I'm going to stop there and bring on Jacque and Roxanne. I know that there are a few questions for them. And let's see if I find them here. Jacque and Roxanne.
Hey, Peter.
Hi, Peter. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. How you guys doing?
Great.
Good. Busy.
I bet. Yeah, me too. I apologize for being kind of out of touch. I've been swamped with stuff, as you can imagine. I'm sure you guys are as well. But I'm going to talk to you guys off the air very, very soon about the developments for Z-Day more specifically. So I just want to go ahead and get that out of the way. But before I have some questions from the forum, but before I begin that, I know you guys are still working on the world tour. Is there anything you'd like to denote about that before we start with questions?
Right. Well, that's really coming together, and we start on that. It's been bumped back a bit, April 8th. And there must be about 20 or 25 countries that are going to host us. So we're going to be in a lot of locations, and we invite everybody to come out and come to the lecture. And we'll take questions, and we'd be glad to meet you.
Great.
The schedule is on our homepage.
That's, of course, thevenusproject.com. And if anyone wants to pursue another event, because I've gotten a few emails as well that some people aren't aware of who to contact directly. Is there any email that you want to give out for people that have an interest in creating a new event?
Well, I don't think we're going to have any more time. We're so booked up.
Oh wow, okay.
Every 4 or 5 days we're going to another country. I don't know how we're going to stand it, but it's going to be a lot of traveling. It's going to be very exciting. And the schedule, as I mentioned, is on our homepage. You can find links to emails of people who are helping to host lectures in their country, so perhaps you can help them. Or, maybe we'll talk to people just in case. You never know what happens. Maybe we can schedule something. But Heather Odom is the person who's doing all of this for us. And her email is on our homepage as well.
Okay, very good. Well, I'm happy to hear that things have filled out with that, and that's truly exciting. I strongly urge you guys document as much of this as possible. Bring a camera or get some other people to do it for you. It'd actually be wonderful to I was just thinking about this, to make a kind of a documentary on the trip itself, featuring you guys. And
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. Excellent idea. I've thought of maybe people filming it. We won't be bringing cameras, but that's a wonderful idea. That would be good as a documentary in itself.
Absolutely, just to see all those different cultures interact. I'll throw that out there. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not sure how that could materialize, but it's definitely worth considering. Good. All right, let's see here. We had some interesting questions. This one's for you, Jacque.
Okay.
Someone's been reading Looking Forward, which is a great book, by the way. I know that we don't talk about that book very often, but anyone out there that hasn't read Looking Forward, it's a really creative and interesting look into these ideas. But someone wanted to ask you about the characters that only achieved 3 hours of sleep, and they wanted to ask if you felt that it was actually possible for a human being to be adjusted to 3 hours of sleep.
Well, I think so, because of nutritional differences in the future, more oxygen in the blood, many different mechanisms that tend to ward off disease, because this is in the future, we're talking about 3 or 4 hours perhaps. And as you get older, you really require less sleep.
Fascinating. Interesting. Yeah, that's very unique. I guess we live in a world that isn't really catering to our health in any concentrated way.
No.
So it's certainly interesting to think about what we'll be like as individual organisms when we're actually catering to our health deliberately. Speaking of that, people have asked me a few times, Jacque, about your health in regards to how you do so well. I think in passing you had mentioned that it isn't that you particularly eat that well, or your diet isn't super regimented, but you have a strong intellectual drive, and I thought that was a really great comment. If you were to comment about your personal sustainability and how you've done so well for so long, what would you tell people about your sense of survival?
I'm subject to the same things they're subject to: artificial coloring in food, artificial flavoring, atmospheric pollution, DDT, all the stuff sprayed around the environment. I'm subject to all of that. I can't choose the atmospheric conditions, and no more than anyone else can.
Yeah, but so many people have roles that they take on, like they retire at a certain age and then they don't have much to do and they're not interested in a lot of things other than just work and maybe a hobby. I think Jacque is interested in so many things. If something doesn't come through, he just goes on to another thing very quickly. He doesn't get depressed. So he has really a zest for life that I think helps in that way.
I know that statistically it's been found that people who retire tend to actually die fairly soon after. There seems to be a powerful psychological attribute that is in regard to survival, which I think is fascinating. I know that the stress levels of most people, it's been known now with science that stress has become a very deadly thing. And of course, our society has tremendous amounts of unnecessary stress. Do you think that the future resource-based economy that you talk about will be productive in the sense that people will have much less personal stress and it will add to their longevity?
I don't think so, because I think their lives will be more or less scheduled, and they will pick the schedule based on their own metabolic rate and physical condition. They have no real serious obligations that are very rigidly regimented, except during the transition from the monetary system to the resource-based economy.
Right. Yes, absolutely. I think much less stress in the future will be achieved, which will add to people's quality of life tremendously. I was just thinking about that the other day. There's so much stress, monetary stress in society, that it really drives people crazy. What was I going to ask on that note? Well, here's another one. Here's a very simple one, Jacque, and I think you've answered this before, but I think it'd be good for new listeners. Where did you get the basic idea for a resource-based economy?
I got it from the human body. I was thinking in terms of, if the brain said, I do all the thinking, I want most of the nutrients, like the free enterprise system. And the lungs would say, if I don't produce or oxygenate the blood, you couldn't operate as a brain. So the brain says to the lungs, what do you need? Everything you need. Everything you need. And then the liver would say, if I don't serve as a filter, both you guys would die. Well, what do you need? Everything you need. So all the organs of the human body seem to be provided for to get whatever they need. If you don't do that, it'll break down as a living, integrated system. I think this goes for all nations and all individuals. They have to have access to the necessities of life, and also they have to be brought up in a non-aberrated environment to the best that we can possibly produce.
Very good, very good. Yeah, I think and of course we use that term system, and I think that's an important word that people need to begin to relate to, that the human body is a system, and therefore the resource-based economy is indeed a system, unlike we call our current model a system, but it really isn't a system at all because everything is broken up and detached from each other.
I agree with you completely.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's see here. Here's a more general question. Someone wanted to know what you think about communication technology in the future. I know you had talked about in some of your books about sound focusing of telephones. This is a technical question. Where do you think we'll be with communication technology in, say, 10 years or so?
Well, I don't think there'll be much difference in 10 years.
Okay.
But except electronically. Our computers will advise us in more areas because their electrical tentacles will be connected to industry, transportation, education, research and science and technology. So we will all be updated very rapidly since there's no commercials, no advertising, only information. You know, it's unfortunate that we seek entertainment. Knowledge can be entertainment in the future. I would say that there's so much to learn, so many new things to do, that sheer entertainment without any basic meaning or relevance will be surpassed. Because in order to understand the world we live in, there's so much new information coming through that we can't afford aberrant information or opinions about things. When I say opinions, I mean not based upon any studies.
Right. Very good. Very good. I think, and of course, the technological spectrum, every day there's something new coming out, advancing technology, and in almost every medium. I tend to get left behind. I stumble upon things that are happening. I mean, what do you think about the rate of change, Jacque? Do you think that we're going to continue the same rate of progress when it comes to science and technology, or do you think we'll hit, the law of diminishing returns is often brought up, where we'll hit
in order to survive in the future, we really need quick access to information and rapid application. You know, when you watch TV today, there's nothing but mostly nonsense, meaning no sense, and entertainment. Entertainment without any definite improvement in human lifestyles. So I would say in the future, people will find information entertaining.
Yes. Yes.
Our concept of what entertainment is, horse racing, prize fights, automobile racing, wrestling matches, all that will eventually yield if we're to make the future. We can't do it with all the garbage that's out there today, which we accept as right and normal. Yes.
Yeah, very good point. The cultural identification is really a complex one to deal with. I think that's really the foundation of what you talk about. I mean, you use the term the redesign of a culture, and I think a lot of people don't fully understand what you mean by that. Would you like to elaborate on the cultural...
I can only try to do that, Peter. When I say redesign of a culture, rather than base our designs on our city designs on some architect's preference, we will use more statistical mechanics. How can we design a city that has automatic, as near automatic as possible, cooling, to take advantage of products like thermosiphon, the shape of the building, so that it has a free circulation of air. In other words, to design things economically and efficiently, not always solve problems with air conditioning and cooling systems. There are many natural ways of doing things, and I would say that the future will rely more upon natural testing. In other words, when man gets to realize that he's not separate from nature, he's a part of nature, he has to work holistically, not only considering human problems, but his relationship to the environment. If he doesn't take care of the oceans, the air we breathe, the atmosphere, the forest, he hurts himself. So I would say decision-making in the future will be more integrated than it is today, rather than what's in it for me, what's in it for society and nature.
Very good. Yeah. I can't imagine how a social organization can work any other way. And, of course, it's mesmerizing to see where we are in the current state of affairs. Jacque, I know you watch the news, and you've been watching what's been happening with the continual bankruptcies of countries out there. While there are some people saying things are slowly getting better, there's no statistics really to support any of this. Do you think that we've reached a new form of collapse where the economic recovery is going to be either extremely long or almost non-existent?
It'll be long and unpleasant, because of the language barriers. Like I said many times, our language is old. We talk at each other rather than to one another. And I would say the language of the future has to be referential. The language that you use has to be based upon physical relationships, not opinions. That's why Congress and senators, all these people today, including the judges of the Supreme Court, would be considered criminals in the future, because they really don't understand ecology, they don't understand environmental influences on behavior. In fact, they are non-entities. They don't even know how to deal with the real world. So I would say the future, in order to operate, must be relevant to lifestyles, to what the earth can produce, and we have to design cities to give human beings the best opportunities for improvement of their health and intellectual growth. Other than that, if we fail to do that, the problems will linger longer.
Yes. Do you see a transition happening through the monetary system, or do you see a transition quickening pace after the collapse of the monetary system?
I'm talking about after the collapse of the monetary system. Right now, people want jobs.
Right.
They don't even know what they want. What they really want is access to the necessities of life, not a job.
Right.
Jobs are boring, painful, uninteresting, and retarding.
Yes, very good. It's fascinating, again, how the cultural nuance is such that people don't even really know what they want, and very often they don't even recognize that what they want is a product of their indoctrination and not based on anything that's actually real or tangible for their survival.
Absolutely, sure. Living in a wooden house, if you paid $200,000 for it, it could burn to the ground in 20 minutes.
Right.
So architecture has to be fireproof, fire resistant to whatever extent we can make it. And we have to have special ingenuity applied to the forest regions with towers to absorb lightning rather than start a forest fire. We'll be able to use many new devices in the future to diminish forest fires and the need for firefighting. See, it isn't firefighters that are problem solvers. It's to prevent the fire in the first place.
Absolutely. That's a brilliant train of thought. I know you talk a lot about natural disasters, and a lot of your engineering has dealt with the problems of hurricanes and earthquakes.
That's the real problems, not human beings, not different nations. The future will concern itself with the problems that affect all cultures. Disease, tsunamis, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes. These are the real, if you want to use words like enemy of mankind, our lack of knowledge regarding these problems. I would say the future civilizations will not fight with each other, but they'll try to improve our relationship to nature through understanding it, not conquering it.
Yes, absolutely. I know that you had, I think I've asked you about this before, with what has happened in Haiti. In your research, have you given much thought to how you would technically orient society when it comes to earthquakes? If you could summarize any attributes that would relate to helping with the problem of earthquakes?
We can build monitors under the ground, seismic monitors, and in the ocean we can have monitors floating all through the ocean at a certain depth. And if there's a mound or buildup in pressure, we know that the probability of a tsunami might be generated. And we'll have warning systems that will measure the movement of ocean currents, the swelling of the bottom of the sea. All that will be telemetered back to the land long in advance of a tsunami. This is the best we can do, use science and technology to enhance the lives of all people, and not from one person to profit on the disadvantage of another person, such as physical illness. There's an organization that profits by that. And so, as long as you put profit ahead of human well-being, you're going to defeat yourself in the long run.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that materialize. And I also thought it was great, a comment that you made in regard to the fact that after they do stabilize Haiti, what are they going to do? They're going to build the same outdated architecture that existed in the first place.
Not only that, they really don't know what to do. Right. They don't know how to solve problems. The politicians, as I understand it, most countries are corrupt, meaning they're also not only corrupt, but they're not qualified. They don't understand enough about ecology, structures, city planning, agriculture. They don't understand anything related to real-life problems.
And speaking about catastrophes like Haiti, Jacque talks about special contingency plans. If anything goes wrong or there are earthquakes or tornadoes or things, there would be groups of people that have pre-planned agendas of going in and cleaning things up, and they have access to whatever they need to build. They don't have to go through this cumbersome process where they're begging for nickels and dimes. All that's worked out ahead of time.
Yeah, that's the way it would make sense in a well-organized society. Yeah, it's truly horrible to see these disasters occur in these already impoverished nations, because we all know that there's very little hope for any type of recovery for most of these smaller nations and poverty-stricken nations, especially now. These United States governments and $12 trillion worth of debt, it just trickles down.
That's not going to work, Peter. That doesn't work because it's not holistically planned.
Right.
When something happens, they do something in that area. It's the whole system that has to be designed in accordance with the carrying capacity of the Earth's resources. Anything other than that will not work.
Yes, I think the public is beginning to learn that a little bit. That's what we're trying to do, is make sure people begin to find these relationships. I think one way or another, people are going to be understanding the problems of the current system, because it seems like they're just going to get worse. Speaking of cultures, there was a question here about if you were to describe how to deal with different cultures and trying to find common ground, whether it's different religions or different social systems, how would you summarize your approach to different groups that
I would say don't try to solve your problems through military systems. That's a supreme failure of nations' ability to bridge the difference. The way you bridge the difference between nations is you emphasize the areas we have in common. All people on Earth need clean air. They all need clean water. They all need a relevant education, arable land. These are the real problems. Military problems solve nothing, except it's very good for business. That is a business that manufactures warplanes, weapons of mass destruction, and it's a sacrifice of life for no useful reason. We don't go to other countries, by the way, to bring democracy. We go there because they have resources that we need, cheap labor, or some other product that we need. We don't go with the wonderful intentions of bringing the enlightened life and knowledge to other countries. That's why they're suspicious of anyone coming to their land telling we've come to help you, like we've helped the Indians.
Yeah. They're all out to grab whatever they can get, people and nations in this society.
Yeah, look at the condition of the American Indians. We really don't help them.
No. Well, I'm still, again, mesmerized that people, even in the modern world, are still so conditioned to think that these wars that have materialized have anything to do with helping any other form of culture.
They're not educated to understand that. It wouldn't serve the advantage of our nation to educate people. I'm even talking about scientists. They should be at the forefront of social change. Scientists collectively should advocate a new social design to avoid problems, but they're so skilled in their own little disciplines. They're focused in optics, structural engineering, mechanical engineering, chemistry, and they don't talk to each other. They have no information on how society is run. To be a scientist, you should be curious about all aspects of human behavior.
Yes. Yes. Great point. On the issue of
in the future, why scientists didn't understand that. I think H.G. Wells had a better grasp of social change than most scientists.
Sure. Yeah, holistic, generalized worldviews. Buckminster Fuller had shared your perception as well, how it's inherently restrictive to condition people just to work in one area, which is, I think, why a lot of so-called scientists have been abused by the military establishment for years.
They have been and always will be used that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by they're not really educated.
Right.
They're converted to a certain kind of tool that would serve the extensionality of a given system.
Right. Right. So in the future, then the course of education, which of course we've talked about before, is to give a very important, broad, generalized sense of knowledge. There was an education question. I know that you've addressed this a few times, but if you wouldn't mind one more time for people that haven't heard this addressed before, run down the educational imperatives that you see for the future.
Well, in the future, children will be taken on tours throughout industry to show how things are made. They'll also be taken through agriculture, showing our dependency on agriculture, soil conditions, rain. They will be educated in physical reference, always. Right. Books, yes, but training and hands-on learning only. So they have a real good and deep understanding of man's or humanity's relationship to the environment.
Yeah, well stated.
Schools will emphasize the physical relationship between man and the environment and how to live together, not to conquer it.
Yes, very good. I would throw in that word spiritual, too, because I think what you just described is really the ultimate form of what we refer to as a functional spirituality, where we understand our relationship to the environment around us, and I think that's one of the best definitions.
Well, our definition is very similar. We say the end of war, poverty, hunger, prisons, police, all that gone, and if that isn't spiritual, I don't know what is.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. All right, let's see here. Other questions we have here. There was people are becoming concerned about our use of our industrial agriculture. People have become concerned about, we have a reliance on hydrocarbon energy for the fertilizers we use. The question was raised here: do you think that we can output the same level of agricultural production with only organic methods using this? Well, obviously topsoil is a problem, but how do you propose having organic agriculture that doesn't use insecticides or fertilizers, or do you not propose that?
Well, it takes nature, they say, about 1,000 years to produce 1 inch of topsoil.
Right.
And we build cities, bingo, right over the land. In the future, we'll shave the topsoil, put it in soil banks. We don't even know what important things are. If people came to this planet from another planet after a nuclear war, there are no records available. The best vaults and the best containers are banks. And if they open the bank vault doors, all they'll find is money and certificates of ownership. No history of science, electronics, technology, all the things that have benefited human beings. The only thing that's well preserved is the monetary system.
Yeah.
What a shameful thing.
Yes, absolutely. Well, coming back to this one question, just to clarify, you don't feel that there's any limits to our ability to produce organically. Given our current state of affairs, we do have problems with topsoil, but of course you've advocated hydroponics, you've advocated aeroponics.
All that's in the transition, saltwater cultivation of food. But after that, into the advent of nanotechnology, I believe we'll be able to produce vegetable tissue. We'll be able to take atoms and arrange it into whatever molecular structure we need. Instead of growing apples and apple trees, we'll cultivate apple tissue in long glass tubes and circulate that. But of course we'll be using natural processes rather than artificial coloring, flavoring in foods. We will study nature. For example, we have today shape memory alloys, materials with a memory. The seed is a wonderful material with a memory. The seed remembers an oak tree, a palm tree, every leaf on that tree. Shape memory alloys only have today one memory. But if we study seeds and how they remember and retain all that information, we've got to study nature because it's been here for millions of years and it's solved a lot of problems. And I think if we begin to study nature more closely, much closer than we do today, we'll be able to solve many problems. I see no shortages.
I completely agree. There's also, I think, you used the example of the crystal, and how if you break off certain types of crystals, they reform precisely as they were before. Is that correct? Did I interpret that correctly?
That's exactly what I meant.
Right. No, I think that's just as another example. I think to give people a frame of reference. I think it's such a tremendously forward-thinking idea and a simple idea to base our processes off of natural phenomenon, to simply learn from the natural world. It still just blows my mind, Jacque, that we've come so far from that reality that virtually nothing is operating in that accord. It still amazes me. You brought up nanotechnology. Do you think nanotechnology is the next revolution, if you will, the next high? It's going to change everything as we know it?
Well, according to nanotechnologists, which is not my field, they say that it's about 15 years away. Let's say it's 30 years away. What a wonderful productive capacity that will give us. But if that doesn't work out, there are many other approaches to problems. There's no one or two approaches. There's no right, wrong, good or bad. All these things are invented by man to try to deal with the world they live in. So they invented a language that's also limited. The language of science has no limitations. There are no utopias. A lot of people think I'm a utopian. They think that I have an idea of what an operant society would be. I don't. I really believe that if I designed a city, it would be the best I know up to now with the information available. But that city that I design would be a straitjacket to the kids of the future. They'll design their own cities. There are no final frontiers.
Yes. I think that's another big one that everyone seems to think that their civilization is the apex of history, and that they can't go any farther. As obvious as it is what you just described, it's unfortunate that most people can't.
What they call heaven is hell to other people that have surpassed that. You know what I mean?
Yes.
A tribe that's doing well, seems comfortable, has enough animals, consider that heavenly. But compared to what? So what you consider an advanced civilization has to do with your education, with your knowledge, with your background. But if you're able to see the future, see the history of technology evolving, I don't mean project like science fiction writers. I'm talking about extrapolating the future from basic ideas. You will see that we haven't even begun yet. We are not even civilized yet. So I would say that the future will be far beyond anything we can imagine.
This is something that's really missing in schools. They extrapolate just the future in terms of technology, but not in terms of how society can be developed and how people can be educated.
Yeah, absolutely. And that seems to be a distinction that's never made, as you point out. Ray Kurzweil, I was listening to a lecture of his doing some research, and he made a good point about how we think about the future, and his comment was that information technology, and essentially technology itself, is moving exponentially, and that our minds can only think linearly. So as you point out, Jacque, it literally is impossible for us after a certain point to have any comprehension of what the future might hold. And I thought that was a pretty decent
Yeah, we only
comment.
think with the tools we're given by a given culture. Do you understand? A Seminole Indian never asked for a stainless steel machine gun. You know what I mean? They can't ask for that. They don't even know it exists. And so the average person, when you say, what do you think of the future? They can't think about the future. They don't have that type of background. They don't even know what's missing today. They don't even understand how their society works. They're not given that in schools today. They read sections of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights in high schools and asked the students what they thought of it. And they said, that sounds like communist propaganda. I'm talking about the Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to show you how far back we are. We are not civilized yet.
Yeah.
And you can say civilization will begin when all the nations of the world lay down their armaments and guns and learn to work together in peace, and all the artificial boundaries that separate people gone. That'll be the beginning of a scientific age.
Very good, very good. I completely agree. Someone had just a simple technical question, a historical question for you, Jacque. They wanted to know if any of your structures have been built outside of your residence in Florida, if any commissions had occurred in your lifetime where anything architectural or anything had been actually implemented. Is there any history of that?
Yes, I designed prefabricated houses which were built in L.A., industrial buildings, but never the super productive systems that I've got in mind.
Right.
He also designed boats. He designed the first jet ski a long time ago before they got popular.
I designed surgical instruments. I never design what I want. I have to design what people ask for.
Right.
Do you understand what I mean?
The trend home also. After World War II, he designed a prefabricated house out of aluminum because he felt that the aircraft industries weren't going to be able to produce the amount of aircraft that they did before, and they'd be idle, so he designed a prefabricated aluminum home.
So that people remain employed. But when I submitted a dome for the future, they thought that was too far out. They didn't want to go that far. So you have a lot of problems between what people understand. Financial people don't seem to understand anything at all, except the investment of money in things that they know are a sure thing. Financial people are not trained to understand what is relevant and what is less relevant. You can tell that because of the big hurricane that occurred in southern Florida that blew most of the houses down in South Miami, and they built the same kind of houses over and over again. Right. There's no real grasp of what a house should be or what it could be.
Right. But no one even thinks about its functionality either and how it could be improved. It's just an edifice, a cultural edifice that is essentially vanity in a lot of ways, I think the way most people consider their
That's the fault with all education. It's geared to a certain level. Architects go through a certain routine which is completely irrelevant to solving social problems and city problems. They call it green technology. They make a roof green, and you think that's social change? It has nothing to do with anything.
Right.
Real social change is knowledge. People being free of the limitations so that they can always look forward to the future. Just as I said, instead of making soldiers, which are, to me, are killing machines, we would send them back to school to become problem solvers. What a wonderful world we would have if nations trained millions of their kids to become problem solvers, not killing machines.
Not to mention what an amazing world it would be if people didn't have to employ themselves for income in occupations that serve no relevance to anything. It could be incredible to see what would happen if people were guided into fields of inquiry and study and production that actually had a return to society. And this is something I bring up a lot to people. I mean, I would say, what do you think, Jacque? Do you think 35, 40% of the occupations in existence are essentially obsolete? Maybe more?
I would say that most professions today will be obsolete in the next 20 years.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly interesting to put that into perspective because, we're controlling everything with patents and property and restrictions, and it's just, I'll say it again, I think I said earlier in the broadcast that if we just got people to focus on what actually had a return to society, the progress would be cataclysmic. We'd find so many solutions if we all started to think and work together and not compete with each other. But very good. One final question, and I think you've addressed this before, but we have to repeat ourselves a little bit because we get new people. But they wanted to ask if you felt that a resource-based economy would result in any form of monotony, in the sense that we only design a few cars, if we even have cars, or a few major products that are really efficient. They feel that it would be culturally monotonous. What do you say to that, Jacque?
Well, it's sort of a limited concept by people with a limited imagination.
Right.
There's no limit to what humans can do in the future. No limit at all. We'll be able to sustain life much longer, do away with most diseases, if we learn to work together. I don't know what the future will be. It doesn't depend on myself and Roxanne or Peter Joseph. The future depends on how many people understand the general direction that I'm talking about. And not only understand it, but work toward it. If you do nothing, I can assure you, nothing will occur.
Yes. Well stated. And we're running out of time. Anything, Roxanne, you want to add, or anything you guys want to state before we end?
I just wanted to mention that people always talk about the transition, but the transition, if we even transition into something more sane and not just dictatorial and go back to the same things that we had before, the transition depends on how much information we get out there about this direction and how palatable it is to people and how it relates to their life and how they can understand it and work, and then they work toward it, as Jacque mentioned. So the transition's not up to us. It's up to what everybody does. I just wanted to state that again.
Yeah, well put, because we still get a lot of people that feel that we can create some type of technical infrastructure very quickly or raise money and all this stuff to build a city, and it's very obvious that our biggest problem is information and education and cultural as opposed to technical. I think it's pretty obvious when you research your background at the Venus Project that what is described isn't completely out of left field in regards to the technical capacity. All the science is essentially in existence now. In fact, many of the things, Jacque, you were talking about 50 years ago that people probably laughed at you about have become true, especially with nanotechnology and a lot of issues. So that information is out there. But all right, well, thank you very much. Sorry for the short segment. I'll have you guys back on again, of course, and I'll be calling you very soon to talk about various things. But I really appreciate it, Jacque and Roxanne. I think everyone else does. Very good. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank
you, Peter.
Talk to you soon.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. And I have 60 seconds to go. I think that just about wraps it up. I just reiterate, I love to see these YouTube promos. Well, it's not, super important, obviously, but getting this media out there and really showing creativity and posting these things, I think would be a lot of fun to get exposure on all of these internet sites. We really have to continue to use the internet for communication. So if you have any promos for your Z-Day event, even if something real simple, just make anything and upload it to YouTube or anywhere and send it to media@thezeitgeistmovement.com, and we'll go from there. And as of now, I will talk to everyone next week, and thanks a lot. Take care.